Hello, this is our submission for the Youth Economic Initiative Econ Olympiad by our team, Ethan Lin, Millie, and me, Katherine Su. This is our response to the prompt, and we'll be presenting our evaluation on the motivation of Trump's protectionist actions and its long and short-term impacts, and we'll be suggesting possible alternative policies. First, we'll be starting with evaluating the motivation of Trump and giving a brief introduction on the concept of protectionism.
So I'll start off by introducing the concept protectionism. Protectionism is defined as the practice, theory, and form of policies for the ultimate goal of securing a country's economy by ensuring the power of domestic industries and being opposed to imports from foreign countries at the same time. It results in high tariffs to foreign countries by high taxes applied to imported goods, and it proposes trade balance by balancing a country's economy by less imports from other countries and an increase in the supply of goods and services produced by the country its own. And it promotes domestic industry, secure workers, especially those low-skilled and low-wage, to a greater extent within the mother country. And the difference between the value of its export and import decreasing in percentage, which affects the net exports X minus N component of a country's real and nominal GDP.
The American economy has long been regarded as the economic powerhouse, with the world using the US dollar as the global currency. The US economy was characterized by strong diplomatic ties, reliance on international trade, and free market principles. And despite its continued global leadership, as globalization and technological changes deepen inequality and job insecurity, and as global alliances and power dynamics changed, Trump capitalized on growing populist sentiment and dissatisfaction within the existing economic order. His administration approached with this American First strategy, which tried to correct trade deficits, reclaim control over domestic economic outcome, and bring manufacturing jobs back to America. But it's important to note that post-World War II, America has increasingly relied on international trade and open markets. So the US is a key component in global trading systems. So that's why at this current moment, all eyes turn towards America. And the world isn't just watching, it's waiting because each of its decisions ripple far beyond its own borders. And US has the abilities to set the trajectory for the global future.
Trump's protectionistic actions is quite current, and one of the biggest actions he has ever done is imposing tariffs. In his first term of presidency, he imposed tariffs specifically on Chinese goods and also banned Chinese technologies, while he also imposed general tariffs on the imports of aluminium and steel, washing machines, solar panels, and etc. Other protectionistic actions he has done are the domestic farm protection, tax exemption negotiations, Tax Cut Job Act, and also preservation of American jobs for American people. While in his second term, which is the current presidency, he has reintroduced many tariffs from his first term, including the tariffs on aluminium and steel imports. And he has also introduced a reciprocal tariffs and also many other tariffs that is country-specific, such as the hundreds of percents of tariffs on China. He has also negotiated tax exemptions and given the exemptions to multinational companies that is bringing America wealth. And there are also theories about him purposely manipulating the dollar value, and that is to be continued and be updated as time of the recording. In the next few slides, we'll be evaluating the short and long-term impacts from the social, political, and economical scopes, and we'll be referring specifically to the tariffs imposed on the imports of aluminium and steel because it is quite prominent, and also that there has already been established consequences from his first and second term.
The short-term social impacts is the decreased rate of unemployment, however, still present with natural rate of unemployment, and which is encountered into inflation and nominal GDP of a country. And it causes higher standards of living, income inequality between the wealth and the poor, and also it increases business confidence in investing because of secure revenue, which leads to greater profit and total revenue compared to when the economy fully relies on imports. And within the diagram, we can see that the LRAS has remained constant and that the SRAS and AD is now equilibrium at YE, which is to the right of the LRAS curve, which introduces inflationary gap.
Immediately, we're seeing that Trump's protectionist measures are testing the boundaries of presidency. We are seeing congressional backlash and judicial resistance, but the political precedent set risks normalizing the erosion of congressional oversight. So this doesn't become just a legal question. It is a question of political structure and the legitimacy of governance within U.S. states. On an international scale, we are seeing a shift in global dynamics as these protectionist measures are alienating allies, undermining coalitions, and delegitimizing universal laws on trade. We see a lot of retaliatory tariffs from allies. We see the EU pivoting towards strategic autonomy. And these protectionist measures could be interpreted as a rejection of multilateralism and cooperative diplomacy, which severely undercuts U.S. credibility in forums such as the G20 and WTO. It not only undercuts U.S. credibility, but also undercuts international institutions that the U.S. is a part of, such as the WTO especially, because the WTO will lose its norm-setting authority as U.S. openly ignores all of its mechanisms and refuses to participate in the rules. As institutions like these relies on state consensus and cooperation of states, they inevitably lack in enforcement mechanisms. This means that these institutions may become dysfunctional and normalize the breaking of these international norms. Without these institutions, we may also see further fragmentation and an increase in regional trade agreements or bilateral agreements instead of having a holistic world trade system.
I'll now be covering the short-term economical impact caused by the implementation of the tariffs, specifically on the aluminum and steel industry of USA. There will be an increase in domestic jobs in the industry first and foremost, which is the goal of the tariff. It was reported that 4,000 new jobs has been created in the aluminum and steel industry of USA, generating over $2.4 billion worth of income, and it has increased domestic production by $2.8 billion worth. It also effectively decreases the imports, which makes the trade balance more desirable. However, due to the high reliance of America on the aluminum and steel imports, a decreasing import will cause prices to rise. It was recorded that the price increased by 2.4% for steel and 1.6% for aluminum after the tariff was implemented. And overall, there will be a decrease in quantity supplied and quantity demanded, which can be explained through the diagram on the right. This diagram is showing the market of steel and aluminum in USA before and after the tariff. Before the tariff, price was at PW, which represents the price if there were free trade. At this low price, domestic suppliers are only able to supply at Q1, while the demand is at Q4. To cover this shortage, imported supply is used. At this point, domestic supply takes up only area A, while the import takes up area B, C, and D, which is a very large ratio, and it causes a trade deficit to fall. Therefore, government imposes a tariff. The tariff will raise price from PW to P-tariff. This raising price will cause domestic supply to extend from Q1 to Q2, but due to the rising price, domestic demand will contract from Q4 to Q3, resulting in a smaller demand for imports. At this point, you can see that domestic supply has increased from area A to area A and B, and import has decreased to only area C. But you can see that general quantity supplied and demanded has fell from Q4 to Q3.
The long-term social impact is that unemployment returns back to the natural rate of unemployment. High wages and costs for business will last and continues as short run because the factors of production and wage increase over time and cause supply SRAS curve to decrease and shift to the up and left. to SRAS2. In long run, automatically eliminates an inflationary gap and cause AT2 and SRAS2 to shift back to an equilibrium point on the LRAS curve, and it increases in aggregate demand over time associated with rising levels of price level from price level 1 all the way to price level 3 as seen on the graph. And that shows creating and eliminating an inflationary gap in long run by the LRAS curve and automatic adjustment of the economy to the long run by the monetarist view of economy.
Politically speaking, in the long run, if courts fail to constrain Trump's expansive use of protectionist measures, such as the tariffs, this might turn trade into an instrument of political coercion and erode democracy. It sets the precedent for a decline in technocratic policymaking for future governments, as it raises questions about accountability in U.S. trade policy. This might also render the Congress as a spectator in economic policymaking. Furthermore, on an international scale, we might see a strategic realignment in global trade and in geopolitics. With the U.S. rejecting multilateral norms, the global economy might fracture into regional or ideological blocs where rules are enforced informally or by power projections and power dynamics. There might be this leads to a collapse in the liberal trade order and reverses the trajectory of U.S. as a global hegemon. By eroding the U.S. hegemonic credibility, Trump might inadvertently encourage others to fill the vacuum. So this leads to a loss in global trade leverage, diplomatic leverage, and in areas where U.S. was once able to set the global terms of development and norm-setting abilities. In essence, I think a better term for this is a loss in agenda-setting powers. In trade forums, environmental negotiations, or policy discussions, other countries might set the rules in the absence of U.S. power.
Now I'll be talking about the long-term economical impacts of the tariffs. As mentioned, there will be a rising price of aluminum and steel, which will also increase the cost of production. It was recorded that after imposing a tariff on aluminum and steel, production costs raised by $5.6 billion, summed up in relevant industries such as automobile and technology manufacturers. Because production cost is a determinant of supply, it will shift the supply curve from S to S1 in relevant industry as seen in the first diagram. This shift in the supply curve will cause quantity to decrease from QE to QE1 and will also cause price to rise from P to P1. The rising production cost and the cost of living will all result in job displacement and structural unemployment. It was recorded that due to this price increase, 75,000 jobs were lost, and also that in downstream industries, which uses a lot of steel and aluminum, 3.4 billion worth of production was cut down. And all of this is causing a cost-push inflation, which is undesirable in the economy. Trump's imposition of tariffs will also have an impact on currency's worth. The tariff makes U.S. purchase less imports, which causes demand for foreign currencies to fall. In turn, the demand for dollar will rise, making dollar worth more. You can see in the second diagram that the demand for dollar will increase, which shifts the demand curve from D to D1, which will in turn raise price from P to P1. Well, this may be good to some extent, but the rising currency value can also decrease demand for exports, which weakens the export markets, since it will be more expensive for current countries to exchange their currency to dollars to buy exports. This can be modeled using a diagram, but it does not reflect the real-world situation perfectly, as it does not consider other actions of Trump. Considering that he also included job protection policies and export boosting policies. But it is also worth noting that dollars peaked at all-time strongest in 2019 under his protectionistic actions.
Now we will talk about our suggested alternative policies. Now,
the policies that the government in the United States of America can
intervene is by subsidies. It can subsidize merit goods in the economy, such as public goods and a merit good that government spending incorporates with part of the government budget and subsidizing certain industries for a better future. And it causes increase of supply from supply 1 to supply 2, and the vertical disintegration represents the subsidy per unit of the goods and services. And total quantity supplied move from Q star to QSB as supply curve shifts to S2, and price decreases to PC after the subsidy. The shaded green arrow represents government spending. Benefited stakeholders include consumer, firms, workers, and those are worse off include the government because of burden on their budgets, and it can all be seen from the diagram.
Now I will talk about my suggested alternative policy, which is a quota. Quota is a limit on the value or quantity of goods that is allowed to be imported in a set period of time. It is similar to a tariff as it is also conservative and protectionistic. It limits the imports in order to protect the domestic industries. However, quota is viewed to be more healthy for the economies for both the importers and exporters. Quotas are able to reduce imports appropriately and reducing dumping of excess supply by importers, while tariffs are able to do so because it may be nullified by government interventions. Quota compared to tariffs are also less aggressive in nature and therefore is less likely to suffer from retaliation. Quota are given a fixed amount, therefore creating less uncertainty, increasing predictability in prices, causing less pessimism in the economy. And all of this can reduce the drawbacks of the policy. It is worth appreciating that countries often prefer quotas over tariffs, given that during the position of tariff on aluminium and steel, countries such as South Korea, Argentina, and Brazil actually negotiated for quotas instead of tariffs. With the diagram, we can see how quota have an impact on the market. Before the quota, price is at PW, which is the price of free trade. At this price, the demand is at Q4, but supply is at Q1, and therefore the rest of the demand is covered by imports, which causes a trade deficit. After the quota, it limits the amount of supply that can be imported, which reduces the supply, making the price raise to P1. The raise in price will make demand contract from Q4 to Q3, and at this new price, domestic producers are able to produce at a larger scale at Q2, and the rest is covered by exports. Given this, quota may have similar effects on the market as tariffs, but there are additional benefits which tariffs does not have. There has been historical records where quotas have been significantly successful, which is the Japanese and US automobile trade in the 80s. America established a quota on Japanese automobile imports, and this allowed new jobs to be created in the automobile industry in US, adding over 100,000 jobs. For a fact, importer countries like Japan know that a quota can actually be lifted once the domestic market has strengthened. Therefore, the Japanese market actually encouraged foreign investment into the American automobile industry. It was recorded that the investment even summed up to $25 billion, and this type of aspect you will not get from a tariff. Therefore, I would suggest that quota is a better alternative. That is the end of our presentation, and here is our citation. Thank you for listening.